Welcome to the Page and Stage podcast, where we explore the art and craft of writing and performance. I'm your host, Jason Cannon. My guest today is USA Today best-selling author Don Bruns. Don is the author of 3 mystery series. His first novel, Jamaica Blue, was championed by author Sue Grafton and became the cornerstone for his Caribbean series. His second series, the Stuff series, involves 2 20-something private detectives in Miami. The Stuff books, including Hot Stuff, Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, and Stuff Dreams Are Made Of, among others, have been praised for their humor, compelling storylines, and characters. A starred review and book list even compares the novels to Mark Twain's Huck Finn. Hot stuff indeed. Don's newest series, The Quentin Archer Mysteries, involves a New Orleans homicide detective and a voodoo practitioner who team up to solve crime in the Big Easy. Don is also the editor of the Music and Murder Mystery Series, a collection of short story anthologies built around song titles from famous albums. First, there was Hotel California, then there was Thriller, and coming out this July is Back in Black, which features not just Don's newest mystery short story, but the newest Jack Reacher story. Don is also a musician, a songwriter, an advertising guru, a painter, a cook, and a stand-up comic who has no idea what he wants to be when he grows up. Maybe we'll figure that out today. Here we go with my conversation with Don Bruns. I am so lucky to be sitting in this gorgeous condo overlooking Sarasota Bay with the massively multi-talented Don Bruns.
Wow, just massive.
Just massive, the massive Don Bruns. There's a story I would love you to start with. I forget where I found this as I was researching you a little bit.
What if it's not true? And what if I don't know it?
Well, hopefully I'll set you up enough. You can improvise it. You can make pretend. You can write the story as we go.
Okay. No, I can make it up. I do that.
Mr. Robinson was a teacher of yours back in school days. And this was a seminal moment, it sounds like, in your development as a storyteller. You were reading Moby Dick.
I would love to know where you found that, because I don't remember ever doing that in an interview. He was teaching Moby Dick. And while I was fascinated by the story, and I don't know that there were any books that we were taught in high school when we studied that I wasn't taken with. I mean, I find most even bad books, I can find something good. But Robinson, who was kind of a Larry David kind of a character, he looked a little like Larry David, and he was a little bit off the wall. And he was reading the part of Ahab on the scene where Ahab is, the first encounter with the whale.
He's reading it out loud to the class.
Yeah, he's reading it out loud, and he jumped up on his desk. He literally stood on his chair, jumped up on top of the desk, picked up a flagpole, and I thought he was going to impale the kid in front of him. It was like, and he started doing Ahab with the harpoon, and he was going after the whale. And, it was, I don't know if it was a defining moment, but it certainly was something that said to me, wow, that's taken the written word and putting it into action.
Yeah.
And if you close your eyes and do that once in a while with a good scene from a book, it just comes alive.
Yeah,
And Robbie was then just perfect with that. There were other times when he would make the scene just riveting. And there were kids, and Moby Dick can be a little tedious,
pretty dense,
but it was just wonderful to see that whole scene in front of us.
Yeah, I can tell you stories of, I'm sure everyone can, of those 1 or 2 teachers who just stick out in your mind. I had a 7th grade English teacher, Mr. Rooker, and he was similarly free-spirited. We came in one day, he was wearing a Superman cape.
No.
And he threw open the window and dove out the window. Now, we were on the first floor, but of course, seeing your teacher just dive out the window, you're caught off guard.
Yeah.
And another day we came in and he's leaning against the wall and he says, we're all just tiny molecules. We're mostly space. And if I vibrate just right, I might fall through the wall. And we all look at him like he's nuts. And he says, I know it's not going to happen, but can you imagine the look on your face as if it did? Just that kind of what if magic.
Sure.
There's another teacher you've mentioned. I forget her name, but it was 4th grade. And she told the class.
Jessie, see, that's where this I always think it came from Jessie Cooper, got up in front of the class and said, there were 26 kids, and she said, we're going to write a book this year, and we're fourth graders, and we're going, we're going to what? And she said, yes. She said, I'm going to write a chapter, and then I'm going to give it to desk 1, and you get a week, and you do the next chapter. Desk 2, you read the first 2 chapters, you write the next chapter.
Wow.
And at the end of the year, we'll have 27 chapters. And she, what do you want to do? She said, well, the Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew, we're fourth graders back in the 50s, you know? So I'm saying, yeah, you know, I want to, fourth graders solving a crime, you know, but, and I certainly don't remember how it went. All I know is that she mimeographed, and you're too young to remember, but mimeographs were these
The
machines.
purple ink?
Oh, yeah. You
Oh, that's
roll
right.
them. And she mimeographed 2 or 3 copies because you couldn't mass produce at that point. And she gave them to us at the end of the year. I took it home and I looked at it and I said, you know, I could do this without the other 25. Yeah, I know I can. And I think at that time, and it took me a while to actually end up, you know, finishing a novel, but I said I could do that. And so I have, over almost 30 years now of published writing,
Mm-hmm.
I have, in my signings, I go to schools, and I have met with educators, I've met with teachers and administrators, and I've said, why not do this?
Yeah.
It's a fabulous creative process.
Yeah.
And they said, well, we teach for the grade, we teach to the test,
Yeah.
and we don't have time. And I said, no, you don't understand. The time is at home.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the kid writes it at home. He's not
And
taking
it's
up
one
class
kid a week.
time.
It's not like, yeah.
And it's not, the kids have enough homework and they don't need more. And I'm going, it's like taking art classes out of school. Why, you know, and music. And we've got to put some creative back in.
Yeah.
You can't keep saying, learn to write. Give them the reason to learn to write.
Yeah.
You know, learn math. No, you know, give them some things that work with that topic so you can get application. And not everybody's going to write a book. But then again, I did.
Mm-hmm.
And I really do put it on Jessie. That was just, I got to write. I was in a book.
Yeah.
And that's a fourth grader. That's, you know, at that age when you, and now with tablets and everything, you know, it's a little different. But at that age when you owned a book,
Yeah.
you got your new Scholastic, you know, Danny Dunn and the homework machine or whatever it was. You kept that book like a girl keeps a doll. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you just kept it in your grasp. And to be able to read that book. So anyway, I can't get anybody to do this, but I wish I could.
Fourth grade, my fourth grade teacher, Mr. Torrance, did a similar thing where he took old scraps of lumber and carpet, and in the corner of his room built what he called the book nook. There was a little mini library, and Judy Blume was in there, and all those books were in there.
Oh, yeah.
But then he would have us write our own stories, and on his own time, he took them home, typed them up, built covers out of cardboard and stickers, and he would publish our books and put them in the Book Nook library right next to Judy Blume.
Yeah.
I still have my copy of the Big 5 horse race, which was my ode to Walter Farley. All 5 of the horses all had a race together. But yes, that is.
Who is the Richard Pradigan wrote the story about the guy in the community who did that? He took a room in his house or something, and every kid who did anything, drew a picture, wrote a story, he put it in that library.
Wow.
It was a fictional story, but I was always taken with that. I thought,
Yeah.
what a cool guy to do that, to give you that option to see what the neighbors or the kids are doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Judy Blume is down in Key West, you know. I've met her several times.
Oh, I did not know
Yeah,
that.
she and her husband, she doesn't write anymore, but they run a bookstore and art studio above.
Okay.
And the people rent the rooms upstairs, and then she sells the art supplies downstairs. No fool she.
Yeah, you mentioned this too, and we'll get into this more later. You didn't write your first book till you were 50.
Yeah.
So you have this childhood experience, and then life happens. And
Well, I wrote. I always had a book. I think I started in high school, wrote it through college. And the thing that the stereotypical thing where you put it in the drawer and you pull it out every 6 weeks or every 2 months and you do a little bit. I'm going to get this finished someday.
Someday.
Finally, I just said, screw it. I got to do this. It's just down to the wire. I can't wait any longer.
Yep.
And what I did was the truth of the matter, I turned 50. I said to my wife, I'm going to Jamaica. I'm going to take my guitar. I'm going to sit on the beach. I'm going to contemplate. I'm going to be this Thoreau, this thinker. And I did that. And I probably drank a lot of rum. And I had some good time.
Can't remember.
Came back and I went to my accountant. I said, how do I write this up? And he said, write a story about it. I said, oh, okay. So I did. And then I wrote it off. And it was Jamaica Blue, my first book. So
I'm going to come back to that because the origin story beyond that of how you got it published, I got to hear that. And I want you to tell the listeners that story in a second. But first, before that happened, before we got to Jamaica, you've done a lot of other things in your life that I want to set the stage because I'm so curious in terms of as a writer, how all these other things impact you as a writer. So you ran an advertising business. You like you mentioned the guitar, you're a musician, a stand-up comic. Kind of what was the career path for you through 20s, 30s before we get to Jamaica and that first book?
When I didn't graduate from college. I did 3.5 years and said, I'm not even learning socials. I'm learning how to perpetually party and have a good time. And so when I got out of college, I had a roommate and we had I had a rock and roll band in high school. In fact, when I was in junior high, I had a dance band, and we were playing dances in Ohio for Standard Oil, for Westinghouse, and we were that good, or at least we were the only band in town, maybe, I'm not sure. But we were 12, 13, 14-year-old kids, and we were playing full-blown 4-hour dances.
Holy moly.
So when I got in high school, I formed a rock and roll band, and we were one of 2 rock and roll bands in the entire town of Lima, Ohio. You can imagine that Lima, Ohio is a hotbed of rock and roll. And so we played all the high school dances.
Yeah.
And in the summer, we played a resort lake that was just outside of town. And then when I got in college, I immediately said, I got to get a rock and roll band. So I put one together the first week I was there. I found a lead guitar player and the drummer who became a really good friend. And we started playing fraternity dances and sorority dances, and we played 4 different clubs downtown Bowling Green, Ohio. Then Mike and I, the drummer, started messing around. He had a great sense of humor, and we started doing routines, just staying up late at night, sitting in the dorm room, playing guitars and making crap up. So we got a call from a group, Sigma News, I think, and they had a group called the Mormon Tabernacle Kitchen and Jug Band, and they were playing at General Motors Institute, and they had a concert up there, which was up in Detroit, and they said, why don't you guys warm us up? So we sat down and got serious about being funny. You gotta have an act, and we had to do 20 minutes. And when we were done, we brought the house down. We got better applause than the jug band did. So
like James Brown opening for the Rolling Stones. Never do that again.
No. Always hire somebody just a little under what you do. And so we started working, and we started doing college gigs, and we started playing. And when we graduated, within the first year, we looked at each other and said, let's find an agent. We did, and we went on the road. And we did 4 years of, we worked cheap Holiday Inns, we were bowling alleys, we would play we did the Playboy circuit, we worked in Vegas, warmed up Ricky Nelson, the Four Seasons, Ray Charles.
Wow.
We did the warm-up acts for those guys, and played Joe Namath's Bachelor's 3 in Fort Lauderdale, and just traveled the country and did our stand-up act. Working mostly clean. I mean, we were a little iffy, but we learned how to ad-lib, do riffs, work the audience, sometimes a little too hard. We had a guy bring a gun the second night, lay it on the table. He didn't like what we said about him. But yeah, I'm making it quick, but that's what I did, yeah.
you were a singer, guitar? Was the style of this sort of like Victor Borge kind of comedy? Was it more like?
No, it was more like, and again, it's dating, but more like the Smothers Brothers.
Oh, great. Yeah, of course.
Where I played a straight guy, Mike played kind of the comic.
Yeah.
And we just worked, and we did a lot. I mean, we were accomplished musicians. I mean, we did a lot. We'd go into a club that was not used to what we did.
Yeah.
And the first hour, we would just do folk songs and pop stuff, and then start to work a little bit with the audience, start talking. And by the third and fourth set, we were full blown doing routines and messing with the people. And it would take 2 or 3 days, and the clubs would just be packed. We had standing rooms outside. And invariably, the owners or the managers would come up and say, "What the hell are you doing? How are you getting all these?" So anyway, it was good.
I did, in my research, and you also find that you were hired to be the solo voice for McDonald's chili?
Yeah, well,
but does McDonald's even sell chili?
Well, there's a reason they don't. I had an advertising agency for 30 years, and a friend of mine who I met through playing in Columbus, Ohio with Mike. We had a gig for about 6 weeks at a club there. We were working, and Dick and his wife would come in every night. They had a kid. I don't know. They left the kid at home and said, "Hey, let's go see Don and Mike." So Dick calls me out of the blue 5, 6, 7 years into my agency, and he says, "I'm working for whatever the advertising agency," and he said, "We're doing all of McDonald's test stuff out of Columbus," and he said, "I've got a background, a track that we did in Texas with guitars," and he said, "I want you to sing the jingle for chili." So I went to Columbus, and I spent, I don't know, 4 hours doing it over and over and over. And it was the original. It was, "You're the one, we now have chili for you. At McDonald's, we do it all for you." And I did it over and over and over. Finally, it was done. And 6 months later, it was playing in all the markets. And 7 months later, they pulled the chili out of the restaurant and never served it again. And I tend to take it personally.
Yeah, of course. You've mentioned, your advertising company. Talk a little bit about how that started. And then I'm especially intrigued about how maybe writing advertising copy influenced or taught you to be a better fiction writer. Like what's the thing that happens in Don Bruns' mind, the muscles that were exercised as an advertiser? I mean, it's fiction. I know I'm setting you up way too easy, but
no, but if you're writing advertising copy, you're writing, half of it's fiction.
You're telling a story.
You're making shit up. You're doing, am I allowed to say that on your podcast?
Of course.
Okay. No, you are, when you are writing advertising copy for almost anything, for 30 seconds, we were primarily audio visual.
Okay.
So I was doing a lot of radio, a lot of TV. You're taking reams of material and you're boiling it down to 30 seconds. And you're saying, I got to tell the story. I also have to keep the romance, the interest alive, and I've got to make it exciting. Now, if you can do that out of 40, 50, 150, 200 pages of material, then you can tell a story. You know how to edit. You know how to break things down. And no, that was just, there's not a day that goes by that I don't think back to that. And in fact, I can write, unlike so many guys that I know and ladies who write volumes and then edit, I write bare bones and then I go in and lay in the rest, because that's the way I did. I approached the advertising and said, okay, here's the message. We do it all for you. Here's the excitement, and here's the presentation. And now I can do that, and I can make it. I can write short stories.
Yeah.
Which I'm doing now in these anthologies we can talk about. But that, I just worked the opposite way. I learned how to bare bones and keep the excitement. And then I start adding characters, and I start adding scenery, and I start adding sounds and tastes and things, and build it from the inside out rather than the other way.
Yeah, because most writers, you'll overwrite that first draft and then curate or cut back.
Hemingway used to write, 900 pages, and then he would just send it to his editor who would do the editing. He didn't even do it.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Hey, this is Jason, and we'll get right back to the show, but I wanted to let you know that Page and Stage is way more than this podcast. If you go check out pageandstage.art, that's pageandstage.art, you'll find a weekly newsletter full of tips, tricks, encouragement, and inspiration for storytellers of all stripes. You'll also find the online bookshop for Ibis Books, which is the publishing wing of Page and Stage. And if you're working on your play, novel, memoir, or speech, you can even set up some one-on-one story coaching with me. Again, that's pageandstage.art. And now, back to my conversation with Don Bruns. You have your touring musician days, you have your advertising agency days, and you go to Jamaica, you finish this book. Now, I'm setting you up again. I got to hear this story at a Friends of Selby Library meeting a year or two ago, and I think it's a fascinating story. So how did you take Jamaica Blue and get it actually onto bookshelves?
The long story, which I'll make short, is that I was going to book conferences, mystery writers conferences, and you go to the bar, and there's Michael Conley. This is going back 30-some years ago, but he still had Concrete Blonde come out, and Mike was the quietest, shyest, reticent guy, and he was a wide open, anything you wanted to know. And Lee Child was starting just at that time, coming out. Just a number of writers who shared their experiences. So Sue Grafton happened to be at a conference.
Sue Grafton, the alphabet.
Yeah, she did. A is for alibi, B is for burglar, C is for... She auctioned off her critique services, and the money would go to the literary foundation in that city. And Linda happened to be with me. She didn't travel with me to most of this, but she did. And I looked at her and I said, I'm going to bid on this. And I bid, and I got Sue Grafton for $500.
And
we were looking
bargain.
at each other. I said, she was a big deal at that time.
Yeah.
It got bigger. But anyway, so I said, well, that's stupid. So I gave her, she said, do you have them? Send me the manuscript. So I did. And 2 weeks later, my secretary called me and said, did you get a phone call from Sue Grafton? And I said, yeah, right. And the short story, basically, she said, I read it, 2 sittings. I think I can sell this for you. She's at a conference in Washington, D.C. She's the featured speaker, and she gets up, she does her talk about right brain, left brain, and she's a very entertaining speaker, and said, well, before I take questions, I want to introduce somebody in the audience, Don Bruns. He's written his book that somebody's got to publish. She just got to have it. We had called a couple agents that she had recommended, and then I called Lee Child, and we sent it to his agent. And during this time, 9/11 happened.
Oh.
And this was the first conference after 9/11.
Oh, my goodness.
And I mean, Washington was on lockdown.
Yeah.
D.C., and we were meeting at, I don't know what hotel, but it was crazy. But the people pent up like after COVID, they were there. It was 1,500, 1,800 people. I walked into the hallway, and Charlie Spicer, who was with St. Martin's Press, he walked up and said, are you the guy? I said, yeah. He said, do you have the manuscript? I said, here.
Yep.
He called me a week later, said, I read it on the train back to New York, and we're going to represent it. Get an agent. So then I had a book sold, but they wouldn't buy it until I went through an agent, because he said, we don't want to mess around with contracts and everything. You need somebody who knows what they're doing. Well, guess how hard it is to get an agent when they've already bought your book?
Probably not.
And I settled for someone who was not very good. But, I got an agent and sold my first book because Sue championed it.
Now, I do remember it. There was one little hiccup where Sue did send you notes.
Well, that was the long story. She sent me a 20-page letter and said, have you ever read a book? This sucks. And I put the letter away, and she called me. That's when she called me.
That's when she called you.
And she said, the first call was, do you hate me, or you ready to kill me or kill yourself? And I said, well, I think it was a little rough. And she said, write another book. You are a great writer. You just miss so many things. Pay attention to this, that. And 6 months later, I sent her the book that she called me and said, I read it. We're going to sell this.
Yeah. That's so cool.
Yeah.
For someone who can't go out and bid on a Sue Grafton to give them feedback, someone starting out, say, what advice would you give in terms of like getting through those doors or getting the kind of advice you need or editorial eye you need to ensure you're out there not delusional, but actually selling the goods?
Go find Sue Grafton.
Go find Sue Grafton.
No, but yes, I'm serious. Go find Sue. I got a call from a judge. He was a friend of mine in Ohio, going back, I don't know, 10 years ago. And Bill called me and he said, I finished a book. It's a legal thriller. I think it's really good. I've sent it out to 13 agents. 3 have actually replied, and 2 of them were form letters, basically.
Mm-hmm.
What do I do? I said, there's a conference called Killer Nashville every year, and they bring in agents, they bring in editors, publishers, and for $30, they will review your first 2 chapters, and they will sit down with you, and they will either buy your book, or they'll say, clean it up, or they'll say, you're terrible, don't bother. I said, okay. And I said, then there's a conference, Sleuthfest in Lauderdale. Every year, same thing. And then there's BoucherCon, which is a national, and that's the same thing. I gave him 5 conferences, and his comment to me was, that's going to be expensive and take a lot of time. I said, yeah, but you're not going to get a form letter.
Yeah.
You're going to be able to meet the people who can make a difference.
Yeah.
And I know a number of people who sold their first book because they went to a conference and they met Sue Grafton or the agent or the publisher or Mike Conley. Mike picked up the phone and called Bob Gusson from Ocean View a couple of years ago. And he said, I've got a good friend. I think the book's good, and we haven't been able to get traction. This is Conley.
Yeah.
So Bob read it. He didn't like it and didn't buy it. But the point is that Michael Conley will pick up the phone and call a publisher for you. So meet Sue Grafton.
Yeah, go find someone who can champion for you.
I don't know any other way, and I do it myself. I mean, I sold a lot of books on my own. I mean, I always, because I went to the conferences.
Yeah.
I mean, you could do it online now. No, they still have the conferences. They still have the same exact deal. And I want face-to-face. I want to be able to pick your brain. I want to talk to you. I want to sell my concept to you. I don't know how else to do it. I just don't know.
Yeah.
I never had, I guess what I'm going to say is I was never turned down on a book. Now, I can't say in the last 5 years that we haven't had a couple that have not landed yet. But up until that point, I always could sell a book. And my wife's, well, you sound like you're bragging. No, it's just that I don't know rejection. I had immediate success and how I found it. I'll tell you, there was a guy at Killer Nashville. The stupid thing is that I can't tell you specifics, and I should, but it happened so fast. And I went to a film writers panel, and it was 6 guys. One guy had written, they'd written for TV, movies, and they were talking about the process. The youngest guy, who had to fill in at the last minute because somebody had dropped out, he said, well, I went to a conference in L.A., and this lady wrote a book called How to Write a Screenplay in 52 Days or something.
Yeah.
You probably know the book.
Yeah,
I've got it back in the library back there. And he said, so I walked up to her and I said, after the panel, I said, can you really do that? Buy the book, find out. So I did. And he said, I wrote a screenplay in 52 days. And he said, I was tending bar. And I walked into the bar and I had the manuscript with me. And I had a buddy of mine, bartender, and I said, you want to read it? He said, better than that. He said, over there is a producer from Warner Brothers or whatever.
Oh, wow.
He said, go over and ask them. He said, I walked over and I said, I got a manuscript. The guy said, let me see it. He said, he leafed through the first several pages. He said, I'll take it and look at it. He said, they're making a Bruce Willis movie next year.
Oh, my gosh.
So, you got to put it out there.
Yeah.
You can't just write letters and hope somebody responds.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen.
That I think part of that, Don, is that it's safer. Like that face-to-face stuff, it's a way to, I think, mitigate the rejection.
I understand that.
Yeah.
And you know me well enough to know that I'm reticent. I'm hesitant. I don't like confrontation. I don't like to meet people. No, it doesn't scare me to go out there and do that.
So you mentioned process telling that story, and that's something I want to unpack with you a little bit in terms of your process. Although based on what I've read about you, you don't really have a process. You just, to your point with the advertising, you write spare and then go back and fill it in. What do you think about, there was something you said, I'm not going to quote you directly exactly right, I think, but you said there's no such thing as writer's block, just don't miss the deadline.
Yeah. I read to a contract, and they give you half the money upon signing the contract and half when you turn in the manuscript. And you've got to hit a deadline. Because they've got a publishing calendar, and they know when that book's going to come out, and they know what you have to turn it in by certain. So, I got 22, 23 books. I've never had to turn any money back. But sometimes I'm like a senior in high school. The essay's due tomorrow, and I'm up till 4 o'clock in the morning. But I get it. You never finish. I don't know a writer who's ever finished to his satisfaction or her satisfaction.
Yeah.
You can always say, you know what? I could tweak that.
Yeah.
I could give her one more little, and
sharpen that punchline.
Just a little bit better. And I look back and say, oh, geez. But no, you have to let it go.
Mm-hmm.
And then let the editor make the decision if you've finished it or not. And many cases, they write and say, okay, punch it up a little here. I need more depth and character and more movement. In this scene, it stops a little bit.
Yeah.
The shortest edit I ever got was, can you put a dead body a little sooner in the book? Who else has a job where you get that kind of constructive criticism?
Right.
Can you move a dead body up a little bit?
Speaking of dead bodies, this is another quote from you. There's that famous adage that you should write what you know. But you write thrillers and murder mysteries and about hitmen and stuff like that. And even though you've got this varied background, I doubt you've actually committed murder, I'm going to guess. So if you're going to write what you know, how do you kind of square that circle for yourself? What does that mean to you?
I don't believe it. I don't know this stuff. I make it up, but it's so easy. John Jakes, who was a member of our Liars Poker group before you joined, John was just a painstakingly research guy.
Yeah.
He spent days, weeks, months, every day in the library studying this stuff because you didn't have internet.
Yeah.
And he was pulling off books you couldn't even take out of the library, the research books.
And just really quick, John Jakes, author of, for people who maybe aren't familiar,
The North and the South, the Kent Family Chronicles.
Yeah. Big sweeping historical.
Oh, yeah. And he was serialized on ABC back in the 70s. We do that today. I don't have to know.
Yeah.
I was doing a short story about a hitman, and I said, okay, what does a really professional hitman make? I don't know. How much money does he make? Because I'm sure that there are, you hear about these, lovers who she pays the guy $500.
Right.
But a real, honest to God, hitman is that's his profession. You have 4 billion references. You can find it and get the average. And that's the thing. And and everybody says this, but writers, especially murder mystery writers, I would hate for somebody to check my computer for all the searches you get really some nasty stuff. You do.
Yeah.
There was a time when I was trying to find a poison, the best poison that wouldn't have lingering effects in the body.
Yeah.
I spent 4 or 5 hours. I must have gone through 500 different sites trying to find exactly who the hell does that.
You're pinging CIA somewhere with all this stuff. Yeah, I was for one of my books, I was researching some white nationalist stuff and Hitler Youth, and the things that would pop up, the rabbit holes you accidentally go down are just like, yikes. Clear the search history.
Yeah, I do on a regular basis.
You tend to write in series. Like you have your Caribbean series, you have your Stuff series, you've got the Quentin Archer mysteries. Was that an intentional choice? Is it kind of genre driven? What are the benefits to writing in series versus the obstacles to writing in series?
When I signed with St. Martin's, they said, you've got to commit to a franchise. So I did. And I didn't mind traveling to St. Bart's, to South Beach, to Bahamas, to Jamaica, to St. I like the idea that I grow the characters.
Okay.
I learn more. I like them. I find that I miss them if I'm not with them, that's because I've now followed them through 5-6 episodes of their lives, and I know their lovers, and I know their bank accounts, and I know pretty much everything I have to. So no, I think still to this day, publishers would like a franchise. If this book sells well, it's sold a lot because of the characters. You know as well as I do that when you read, I can ask you, what was the plot? What happened in the book 6 months later? And a lot of times you go, well, but the guy, he is the coolest guy. He's a banker, and yet he's got this side hustle. And you know the characters.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't tell me the plot of any Jack Reacher story.
I was having the same thought.
But you know Jack.
You know he's 6'5". You know he carries a toothbrush.
Harry Bosch.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You know, the baggage that he has. His wife died in China, and his daughter is this. But one of my favorite books was Concrete Blonde. I can't remember what it was about, but I liked it. But I knew Harry Bosch.
Yeah. I want to talk about one of your, I think it's the Quentin Archer mysteries, Casting Bones, right? No, I got that wrong.
Yeah, no, you're right.
No, Casting Bones was the first book of the Quentin Archer, right?
Yeah.
Because not all stories
I don't remember.
That's right. I remember my character. But not all stories are quite as smooth sailing as the Sue Grafton story. In this case, Casting Bones, it had some major ups and downs for you. And this is another part of being a writer, like the TV, film, options, all that stuff. Talk us through what was going on with Casting Bones and your highs and lows with that experience.
You mean as far as the writing or what happened to the
book afterwards?
Well, the book afterwards, yeah. I had written it, the first one. There are 3 in the series, Casting Bones, Thrill Kill, and No Second Chances. And it's about a homicide cop in New Orleans who meets a young, attractive voodoo lady who says, I think I can help you. And they form a tenuous relationship. He doesn't trust her. She doesn't trust him. There's a little bit of the supernatural, not enough to make it, The Walking Dead.
Right.
So I'd written it, and I really felt good about it. So it was floating around, and I did not have it sold. And I was building at the time a Twitter following, an X-File. I was every day I was adding stuff, and I get this note. And again, don't you say, how do you get a book sold? I get this note from a lady who's with Severn House in Great Britain.
Wow.
And she said, I've noticed you haven't had a book out in over a year. And I wrote her back and said, how do you know that? And she said, well, actually, I've read some of your books. I follow you. She said, do you have anything that you'd like me to look at? So I looked up Severn House. Severn House was, at the time, more of a library type thing. They weren't huge in bookstores, but they did sell through Barnes & Noble and, all the stores and Amazon, obviously. I called my agent at the time, and I said, send her Casting Bones. And she did. Kate wrote me back. She wrote me in the course of our correspondence, and I met her then in St. Petersburg, actually, a couple of years later. She wrote me 4 letters that are the most complimentary letters. They are letters that I just said, oh, my God. Where Sue Grafton started off, have you ever read a book? She says, these are fabulous. These are so. And so she bought the book. Then she ordered the second one. Then she ordered the third one. So we were building a franchise.
Yep.
And I said, I really don't want to do more than 3 because I just, at this point, feel that I don't want to stretch it to a point that I don't think there's any more there. And I'm just putting out the words. I'm trying to think how it happened. I got a call from a guy at Torn, I think it was Torn Sky Productions. He's on the CBS lot in Los Angeles.
Okay.
And he said, I'm interested in your voodoo story. And I cannot for the life of me remember how he found me, but he did. And it was like Kate at Severn House. She said, well, I saw you on Twitter. That's how I got a hold of you.
Oh, man.
You know, so, I mean, the chance of that happening.
Yeah, yeah.
And then to get a 3-book deal out of
Mhm.
it. So he said, I want to talk to you about this. I said, well, you want to talk bad enough that I'll fly out there and see you? He said, come on out. So I get to go on. Les Moonves was still there at CBS. It's a while back, but he said, come on in. So I went in to his office. His partner is the guy who plays on NCIS Los Angeles, and he's got the sex symbol of that group. You know, they optioned it.
They put an option on it.
Yeah, and they paid me for an option, and then it never got made. So 2 years later, we didn't do it. And then he calls the agent I have now, and he says, I've got somebody interested. Want to option it. So we did, and that never came to be. But that's not unusual. I mean, you know that better than I do.
Yeah.
There's just...
Lots of things get optioned. Yeah. Everyone's hedging their bets.
Yeah, they want to put stuff on the shelf so that the right combination of actor and director come along.
They can snag it. They've already got the content.
Hey, I've got a piece perfect for you.
Yeah. You
got an opening. Let's do this. So, yeah.
So it's still in limbo then? Or
no, that is not at the moment, but we're now sending it back out. We have an agent out in my agency has a film agent in L.A., and she is shopping it now.
All right.
We'll see.
Well, fingers crossed.
No, I mean, I said Lee Child, who's a good friend, does Reacher. Mike Conley, a good friend. Bosch Revisited, and The Lincoln Lawyer. C.J. Box has 2. Jeff Deaver, who's in my book from last year, my anthology, has Tracker. Come on. It's my turn,
I was about to pivot there into these anthologies because I think they're so cool. And it's a series of anthologies, the Music and Murder Mystery Series. Yeah. So clearly up your aisle.
It's a franchise.
The first one was called Hotel California.
Yeah.
The second was called Thriller. And the one coming out, when is it? July 24th?
16th.
July 16th is Back in Black. So these are all famous.
That is getting unbelievable press on the internet. There are the Reacher websites. Every one of them is saying, oh, my God, we can't wait for this. And the first Hotel California had a
Reacher story. I remember. I read it, yeah.
It did well. It earned out within, we were getting royalty checks and a nice advance and then royalty checks. And when you earn out, it means the book sold enough that they covered the expense to you, and now they're paying you a percentage.
Yep.
And it was 6 months. We got 2 royalty checks on that already.
That's
Anthologies don't normally
do that, yeah.
Do that well. Well, the second one, Jeff Deaver's in it, who is the author of the TV show Tracker, and Heather Graham.
Yep,
she's up for an Edgar Allan Poe Award in April or May of this year. So we had some really good stuff. I don't think that enough attention was paid, but Back in Black is getting really good press already from people who haven't even read it.
Yeah.
But they're excited because there's a Jack Reacher story.
And Amazon, that
and
shows.
Heather Graham, who's up for the Edgar, is in it.
Yep.
And Reed Farrell Coleman, who wrote the Jesse Stone series after Robert Parker died.
Love Jesse Stone.
And he's done 6 of those, and he's New York Times with that. So there's really good authors in there.
Yeah.
Andrew Child, who wrote the Jack Reacher story, wrote You Shook Me All Night Long.
Yeah, this is what I want to, because I think this is what people who don't know these writers yet or don't know about thriller anthologies, what's so cool about these is that the concept is you take a famous album and each writer gets one song title from the album, and that's it. So like you send off to Andrew Child or Heather Graham a song title, and they have to write a short story from that title, and that becomes the anthology. So it's almost like an album concept. They're not connected necessarily by a theme or a character. It's all original short stories, simply connected by song titles from that album.
And the song titles are normally not, the stories are not based on the song.
Right. So this is so cool. So Hotel California.
We're able to take that title.
Yes.
And do whatever we want to do with it. But at least... And the covers are really cool, too. The scary covers. Back in Black is, I think I sent that.
I'm going to include it on the website. It's so cool. It's so cool.
Yeah. And they have been, some companies want control over a cover and things like that. They have been, Blackstone Publishing has been just unbelievably cooperative in letting me call the shots, and they'll send me ideas. And then, I mean, I had 30 years in an advertising agency. I have a graphic background enough to say, here's what I want you to do. Twist this, turn that, put a lightning bolt. And so that's good. But no, we're excited about that. And then we just got the advance for next year, which is Bat Out of Hell.
Meatloaf.
The Meatloaf album. And guess who's writing Bat Out of Hell, the title story?
Oh, boy. I don't know.
Andrew Child.
Andrew Child again. Fantastic.
Jack Reacher.
Can't get enough Reacher. Never enough Reacher.
But that's the most perfect title for Jack Reacher you could ever get.
Yeah.
Bat Out of Hell.
Where did the idea for that kind of this song-based anthology come from?
It's all over the place. Nobody is doing it as well. Seriously, they're doing more trade paper first, and the distribution is. But a guy out of Iowa, I think he's a professor, called me out of the blue and said, "Hey, I understand you're a Jimmy Buffett fan." And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, I'm doing a Jimmy Buffett anthology, and we're going to take one song from every album. And here's the album. What do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, Cheeseburger in Paradise." So I wrote it, and I had a great time. That's where I got the hitman, and he has to go to Munster, Iowa, and kill the mayor of that little town, and he ends up killing the guy by a stampede of cows. Because the guy, he doesn't kill the mayor. He ends up killing the guy he thinks probably should be killed. Right. Bottom line is, what I learned, you always learn something in a book. I learned that more people are killed by cows than any other animal. Alligators, bears, mountain lions.
Really?
More people are killed by cows. I don't know if that exactly sold stories or not, but,
That might have to be the title of the podcast, Don.
Isn't that
More
cool?
people are killed by cows.
Yeah, and you know why they don't do that? Because it's not romantic. It's not sexy.
Scary.
It's not sexy. It doesn't, come on. You get crushed by a cow. An elephant picking you up by the trunk and throwing you on the pavement. That's what people want to read
Trying
about.
to imagine the cow version of Jaws.
Yeah, it just doesn't work. It doesn't work.
So these music anthologies, all the links will be on the website. Everybody go check them out. Back in Black is already on pre-sale on Amazon. You've mentioned before editors, and you are the editor of these short story anthologies. So two-part question, because you're also editing another collection coming up soon too. Isn't that right?
Yeah, it's going to be for the BoucherCon. It's going to be the Mystery Writers of America. Every year there's an anthology of mostly unknown, sometimes almost always first-time writers. It's sprinkled with a handful of people who, will bring up the saleability of the book. And they asked me to do it this year. And people like CJ, Chuck Box, and Conley, and people like that have been the editors in the past. Some of it's a little more ceremonial,
right?
But there's a lot of work. I gotta find 6 judges. I have to put together a panel of this and that, and then go out with the plea for the writers. So anyway, so I'm doing that too.
So in you have your editor, and you talked about even Hemingway, whose editor did most of the heavy lifting. When you're editing something like this, like you don't send Andrew Child or Heather Graham 20 pages of notes on their short story. Do you give them feedback on the stories, or is your editing job more kind of the design of the book?
That's the way I approached it when I called Julie Gwynn, my agent, and I told her, I said, here's my pitch. And you're going to sell this, but if we sell it, you are going to be doing a lot of the editing, because she's a very good editor. She above any other agent I've ever had, writes back and gives me edit points on books and stories. And she said, I'm in. We'll do that. Well, then it goes to Blackstone, and Blackstone does the edits. And I'm reading Heather's story the other day, and there's a glaring error, and it did. And that's funny, it's just a side story. But when I first started in this, and I had 3 or 4 books published, by reputable companies, and I was at a conference at a library, and there were 2 or 3 self-published people there, and it was the advent of self-publishing. It was in its infancy.
Yeah.
The one guy, the questions were coming from the audience, and you get depending upon the publisher, you get a content editor who goes through and checks every product, restaurant, hotel, whatever you've done to make sure you haven't maligned them.
Yeah.
And they want to know, you'll get a list of everything that's their job, the content editor, just to do that, to make sure that we're covered on all that stuff. And then there's the grammatical editor, guy who writes back and says, okay, you misspelled and you didn't put a comma and then there's the content editor who gives you, can you give me another 2 paragraphs or another page or another chapter and help build this credibility. Then it comes back and you go through it. And I was giving it at the time, I still do, to my wife, who's an English teacher, and she edited high school English. So this guy who's self-published, somebody says, what's the editing process? And the self-published guy raised his hand. He said, I'll take that. Try to find somebody you trust to read it through and tell you if it's okay. I said, oh, that's the way it's done. Okay. I missed that part.
I always like to wrap up with a segment with 2 pieces of advice and a spotlight. The first question for you, Don, is what is the best advice you've ever taken?
You did ask me to look into that, and I don't know.
Well, don't give away the secret that I gave you time to do your homework.
No,
you missed the deadline, Don.
No, you did that, and you said, I want you to have an answer for this. And I don't know. I mean, I've had so much advice from so many people. I guess one of the best things was Barbara Peters. We did a book through her Poison Pen Press. I did my first anthology that I was co-editor on, A Merry Band of Murderers. And we had a CD in the back. Every author had to do a song.
Oh, my goodness.
And it was very cool. And Jeff Deaver was one of them.
Yeah.
She said, when you think you're clever, you're not.
Oh, wow.
And it basically was, if you read a line and say, oh, my God, I nailed that one, you probably didn't,
Flag it.
Yeah. Be careful of becoming enamored with what your little turn of a phrase or something. And what's the second thing I was supposed to remember?
The second one was, what's the worst advice that you've ever given?
The worst advice I've ever given, when my daughter was working for American Eagle in Pittsburgh, and she called me and said, I want to go back to Columbus and work for Abercrombie Fitch. And I said, you've got stock options. You've got you're making a good salary. And she said, well, I said, don't. And she did, and she's doing much, much better. Now, that has nothing to do with writing. That's the worst advice I ever gave.
Well, we can unpack it. Maybe take the jump sometimes. Everything costs something.
Okay, there you go. See, you turned that. And you thought you were clever, but you're not.
I'm not clever at all.
No, I don't know, man. It's like I hesitated until actually 3 years ago. In this business for over 30 years now, publishing, the number of books I was always an imposter in my mind. And I don't know if that's not true with most people. Sue Grafton kind of came at me with that. She wrote me a letter unsolicited when she was writing, I don't know, X, one of her last 3 or 4 books. And she emailed me a letter, and it was going through some of the process, and she said, I'm just venting. And she said, I'm at a point in the book where I don't know where I'm going with it, and I'm not sure anybody else even cares at this point.
Wow.
And I thought, if Sue Grafton is unsure of herself, I have no right to be sure of myself. And I wasn't. And so I wouldn't do, when I was asked to do talks, when I was asked to give advice, when I was asked to do a seminar, when I was asked to talk about, do a presentation. I'm doing one in April at Ringley. But they said, you have enough experience, it doesn't matter. You can tell people, all the positives and all the ways to get. And I never felt like I was capable. I never felt like I had the credentials to pull that off. And then Linda looked at me one day and said, my God, you got 22 books. What are you waiting for?
Yeah.
You've been paid for 22 books, advances, royalties. You've been given designations, USA Today, best-selling author. You've been given Amazon #1 on Casting Bones. And you're a good communicator, so why don't you go out? And so then I started accepting things.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, you're right. I'm so, the insecurity anytime as a performer. I don't know how you feel. I mean, you're a performer, you're a writer.
Yeah.
Are you pretty sure of yourself? You're pretty sure you know what you're doing all the time?
I know what my strengths and weaknesses are, but that doesn't mean that I'm necessarily sure of myself. I remember when I started my first time, I was teaching the college level, university level classes, and I had a mentor, Deanna Gent, she was chair of the theater department at a university. It's a brilliant woman who I stole so much from in terms of my own processes and mindsets. And I remember telling her after a class, I get up in front of these, and I'm like, they're paying how many thousands of dollars, and I'm supposed to be, I remember my professors, I held them in such esteem, and who am I? And she's like, oh, that's normal, Jason. I still feel like an imposter half the time.
Yeah.
I think that's important, that the way to think of it, I'm paraphrasing what she said to me, is that that's actually your humility, that you don't think you're clever. So that's why you can get away with sharing your experience and what you've learned, because you're not offering it from a place of, I know better than you. You're offering it from a place of, this is what I've been through. Then we could talk about the work separately from our egos.
Yeah. I think that's true. And I think that, I know deep inside that when I start talking, I actually make sense. I surprise myself. I'm going, where'd that come from?
Yeah.
It comes from the fact that I've been doing this so long that I do know more than I'm willing to admit. But it's a fun process. I love building my own world. I love inventing the people that I hate and that I love. There is just such a satisfaction. Anyway, thank you, man. I appreciate
Don, absolutely. Really
the
quick.
opportunity to
Spotlight. Remind everyone what you've got coming up here.
I have no idea. July 16th, we have Back in Black will be available on, you can order it now. I don't know when you hear this, but it's you can pre-order it.
Mm-hmm.
It's got a brand new Jack Reacher story in it, and that's the one we're pushing at the very moment.
Fantastic. Don, thank you so very much for being with me today.
Thank you, Jason. Appreciate it.
You've been listening to the Page and Stage podcast. Send me your thoughts and questions at jason@pageandstage.art. I always love to hear from you, and I'll be featuring your questions on future episodes. This podcast is built with Alitu. That's ALITU, Alitu, the all-in-one online podcasting app created by Colin and his amazing team over at thepodcasthost.com. You can learn more about all my guests and access their websites, links, and upcoming projects in the episode summaries over at pageandstage.alitu.com or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thank you for listening, and until next time, I'm Jason Cannon, and I cannot wait to hear your story.